Welcome, viewers. In today's special edition of the Geo Interview, we have the honor of hosting Mr. Paul Fletcher. And Mr. Fletcher is the federal member for Bradford. Additionally, he has also served as Shadow Minister for Government Services and the Digital Economy, Shadow Minister for Science and Arts, and is currently Manager of Opposition Business in the House. I welcome you again, sir. How are you doing?
I'm very well. It's great to be here with you on the Geostrata.
Yes, sir. We're very glad to be having you. Sir, I before we come on to the questions that I have for you, you've been in our country, India, twice this year. So why was that the case? And what is your experience like?
I've had the chance to visit India twice this year. I was in Delhi for 3 days in January, and then in June, I was on a trip in Bangalore for 4 days in Delhi for 2 days. The first time was to speak at a conference, mainly about some laws that we passed in Australia to deal with Google and Facebook and their effect on the Australian media sector. That's attracted a lot of interest around the world, and the Digital Publishers Association of India invited me to come and speak at the conference in Delhi. I also did some meetings at that time to learn more about Aadhaar, the National Digital Identity System in India, which of course has been a huge success. And then I came back again in June. It was a delegation organised by what's called the Australian Information Industry Association, and we were wanting to learn more about the huge tech sector in India. So we visited companies like Infosys, HCL, Kindle, and a bunch of other companies, visited some startup companies. And it was just a fascinating insight into the booming technology sector in India and how important it is for India's prosperity, but also the way that IT, technology, mobile communications are being used to deliver government services to so many people in India and to be more inclusive than was previously the case.
All right. I think that the visit should they should even continue, and they are like a sign of the growing relationship between both the countries. Now, with that, sir, I'd one of the things that we recently happened between India and Australia is the recent visit by a prime minister to your country, and there was a huge show of support and bonhomie growing between both the countries. So, with that in context, how do you see the relationship between both the countries panning out?
I think the relationship between India and Australia is strong and growing. There is strong political support in Australia from both major political parties, both the Liberal Party that I'm part of and the Labor Party, for the present in government. Both parties strongly support the relationship with India. The security relationship is growing strongly as part of the Quad, along with Japan and the US. And that's really about shared democratic values. And speaking up for those values in the Indo-Pacific, I think both countries want an Indo-Pacific which is governed by the rule of law, and where every country has the right to advance and develop its prosperity and serve the interests of its people. Clearly, one of the other major factors, I think, that contributes to the enormous and growing strength of the relationship between our two countries is the large and growing Indian diaspora in Australia. The number of Australians of Indian background is large and growing, and certainly in Sydney and Melbourne, there's a lot of people of Indian background. If I just take my own electorate, so there's about 110,000 people on the electoral roll in my electorate. Of those, according to the most recent census, over 4% report being of Indian background. And for example, there's a Sikh temple in my electorate. We had a Diwali festival locally, which had about 500 people attending it. So those person-to-person relationships, the family relationships are very strong. And I think that then contributes to strong and growing economic engagement as well.
So, having talked about the Indian diaspora, in fact, many of my relatives are also they live in Australia. So, just to add on to that, now, so one of the things between the bilateral relationship between both the countries is trade and economics, which forms us very crucial pillar between our two countries. So, in your view, how do you think we can further enhance upon our economics and our trade?
One of the major services exports for Australia is education, and we have large and growing numbers of Indian students in Australian universities. And of course, with 1.4 billion people in India, with I think more than half the population under the age of 35, with the country becoming ever more prosperous, and with the demand for education continuing to grow, clearly Indian students not only are being educated in the excellent Indian university system, of course, the IITs have global reputations, as do other Indian universities, but there are so many students and people wanting tertiary education that, of course, large numbers are coming to countries like Australia, as well as the US, Canada, New Zealand, Britain, and so on. And certainly from the Australian side, we see that relationship only growing and continuing. Um, the the opportunities in a whole range of sectors we believe are very significant. Close to defence ties, for example, in turn will have economic benefits, and as well, I think the likelihood of increasingly seeing capital flows between the two countries based upon the number of people, uh, certainly in Australia, with deep knowledge of and family connections to India, and of course, significant numbers of Australians and growing numbers of Australians travelling to India for business and for other purposes. I think the economic prospects and the relationships are strong, and the prospects are very good.
Surely, sir. Now, I'd come directly to the elephant in the room, right? So it's impossible to talk about Quad if we are talking about India and Australia bilateral relationship. So as we all are observing that there's a shift of gravity in terms of geopolitics to the Indo-Pacific. And literally one of the very first things that comes to mind when you say Indo-Pacific is the Quad. So, sir, and now I would like to ask you particularly because as a policymaker, as an MP, Australian MP, how does Australia see Quad? What does it think about it? And how can the four countries achieve its aims? Because you would have a unique perspective that would be distinct from the perspective of, let's just say, the journalist or anyone else. So, how does Australia see the Quad?
I think the starting point is that the four countries that are members of the Quad, India, Japan, the United States, and Australia, are countries that share democratic values. Each country, of course, has its own distinctive form of democracy, but fundamentally, uh, we are four countries that share democratic values. We're also countries located either wholly or partly in this very fast-growing region of the world. And we have a shared interest on behalf of our own citizens, but also more broadly for the continuing growth and development and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific. And that in turn depends upon countries within the Indo-Pacific uh, having autonomy, being safe from aggression. So these, I think, are some of the values, the shared values that underpin the Quad. Certainly, it's a defence and national security relationship, but it's much more than that. And the economic ties between those four countries are very meaningful. And they also, I think, involve some significant complementarities. That's to say, areas where one of those countries might have a strength and another might have a weakness. So, for example, Australia is a major exporter of resources, iron ore, coal, natural gas, uranium, increasingly also the critical minerals that will be so important in the transformation to um, a renewable energy powered economy. So lithium, for example, Australia has large reserves of lithium. On the other hand, one of Australia's weaknesses and one of India's huge strengths is people. We're only 26 million people, and it is very noticeable the extent to which our growth in Australia depends upon the contribution of smart, energetic, motivated people coming from countries around the world, and increasingly people from India are making up a large share of those who are coming either on short-term visas or for permanent residency in Australia. So I think those complementarities between the different countries in the Quad are of enormous importance. The India's population, its size, but also its youth, is a huge asset. And by contrast to, say, Japan, a country with many, many strengths, but as is widely known, it's also a country with an aging population. So I think those complementarities are very important. And I saw a clear example of that on the recent visit I took to India, visiting the Indian offices of Adobe, the US software business in Noida, near New Delhi. I didn't realise this until this visit, but about a quarter of Adobe's worldwide staff are located in India. And a lot of product development, a lot of software, a lot of code writing going on. I think that's one good example of the complementarities between the four countries in the pod. And collectively, I think each country brings things to the table, but also gains real benefits from working closely with the others.
All right, so having talked about the cooperation between all the four countries and how they complement each other, let's talk about emerging or critical technologies, right? As you even mentioned at the start of the interview, that the reason for your visit has been also regarding the technologies. So we observed that we are living in an era of rising technologies, and there was this research by the Goldman Sachs wherein they pointed out that these technologies, which could be something like Chat GPT or AI systems, they will have dollars to our world economy. Now, having said that, do you see a possibility between India and Australia of entering into some sort of technological cooperation agreement? And if you had to support it in your parliament, would you do it?
I can certainly see such possibilities. When you look at the strength and scale of capability that India has across the entire technology sector, the amount of expertise, the amount of development capacity, that's something that any other country would want to work with. Conversely, I'd point to, for example, the strengths that Australia has in medical research. We have a lot of world-leading medical researchers. But when you think about the process of doing trialing new drugs, you often need a minimum number of people with the condition that you're trying to treat to participate in the trial. And where there are rarer conditions, it's hard to find that number of people, certainly a country of 26 million. But of course, the 1.4 billion people in India means that amongst the many strengths India has, it's recruiting people to be part of a trial for new drugs is something where India has relative strength. So that is just one of the many examples, I think, that readily come to mind about ways that certainly Australia and India could work together and again take advantage of the complementary strengths that each country has.
So having talked about geopolitics and technologies and economics, let's talk about right now environment, because climate change is happening and all of us are more than aware of that. Now, now this question would not exactly pertain to India, Australia, but Australia in general. And the thing is, now both of our countries, they are extremely rich in biodiversity. So that makes us much more sensitive towards climate change as well. So what, in your opinion, can Australia tell the world about how to tackle the climate change? What would you say on that?
Certainly in this country, as I saw on my recent visits to India, climate change, reducing emissions is a priority. We've committed to net zero by 2050, and certainly when our party was in government, a whole range of initiatives directed towards that objective. Australia is a country that is very well equipped to generate renewable energy. We've got 7.7 million square kilometres, but only 26 million people. That's a lot of space that can be used for renewable energy facilities. We've also got a lot of wind, and it's feasible to have wind plants in different parts of the country, taking advantage of different wind patterns and different weather patterns in different parts of the country. So certainly the energy transition is a critical part of how we all respond to the challenge of climate change. I was fascinated to see some examples of work being done on forest regeneration in India, and this being done by some of the big technology companies, big IT services companies. And so the examples, I think, of clever thinking, innovative thinking in this area around the world are many. We do have a big challenge. Collectively, as a world, we have a big challenge. But I must say, as a politician with portfolio responsibilities in science, I get the privileged opportunity to meet quite a few scientists and listen to the work that they're doing. And I am optimistic about the capacity of scientific and technological innovation to transform our energy system, our global energy system, and to adapt to the challenge of climate change.
Surely, sir. So now, having talked about a lot of stuff from again geopolitics, environment, all sorts of stuff. Now, this is going to be my last or one of my last questions to you is right now. And what's been your experience like as of yet being a politician, and what advice would you have for us, the young people?
I think that democratic nations like Australia, like India, have certain inherent strengths that autocratic nations do not. Then when you add to that the extraordinary position that India occupies as now the world's most populous nation, that reached that tipping point, I think, just this year, but also with such a young population and a population which is increasingly well educated. The traditional disadvantages that a country like India suffered from, perhaps even only 20 or 30 years ago, high levels of literacy. It's very impressive to see how quickly that is transforming, in part through the use of technology. So I do think that India is a country that is very well positioned, and that scale, the scale of the consumer market in India, as average household income and wealth increases, and it's clearly happening at quite a rate. What that simply means is that India will become more and more important economically and culturally around the world, and that importance is only underlined by the size of the Indian diaspora community in Australia, in Canada, in the United States, in the UK, countries around the world. So, I think the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years for India and for Indian people are very, very exciting. And I think your country already occupies a major position on the world stage, but that is only going to increase.
Well, thank you so much, sir. And just on the parting notes, it's impossible again to talk about India Australia and not talk about a cricket relationship. So, just as a parting note, as we were even discussing before the start of the interview, what would you say on India and Australia cricket relationship?
I think it's an enormously important connection between the two countries. And of course, it's long been a feature of summer in Australia, whatever it is, every second or third or fourth summer that the Indian Test cricket team is here. Of course, many Australian cricketers now playing in the IPL, and a lot of Australian cricketers are real champions for India in the Australian community because at the time they spent in India, the friendships they built up, the familiarity they built up with India as a nation. So I think it's a very important cultural connection, and it's really one of the reasons, it's an important reason why the friendship between Australia and India has a special character that not many other relationships between the two nations are able to do.
Sure. All right, sir. Now, well, with that, we would conclude this Geo interview with you. So the Geostrata thanks you for having this interview. And what we surely hope to do is we hope to host you again, and perhaps we would have much more to talk about.